Society. My name is Ronald Grimm, and I am the Vice President of the Washington Map Society and the Program Chair. Welcome to tonight's program, which is sponsored virtually by a partnership of 7 map societies representing all parts of the country: California, Chicago, New York, the Philip Lee Phillips Society, Rocky Mountain, Texas, and the Washington Map Societies. The map societies are nonprofit organizations that support map collecting, cartography, and the study of cartographic history. If you are not a member, we hope that you will consider joining at least one map society. Benefits of each society vary. For example, members of the Washington Map Society receive 3 annual issues of the Portolan Journal, digital access to all past issues of the Portolan, digital access to past guest speaker lectures, and many other features in the members-only section of the Washington Map Society website. If you are not a member, the Washington Map Society has an introductory rate of $25 for the first year of a digital membership. Shoot. We and our partner map societies would like to thank our advertisers who support our groups and also help make possible the publication of our journals, the Portolan and the California Map Society Scalafia. And at this point, I would like to reiterate an announcement that has gone out by email to members of the Washington Map Society. We are in the process of looking for an editor of the Portolan. And if you are interested, I ask you to send a note of your interest to one of the board members or to the Washington Map Society website or to the email. Before we proceed further with tonight's program, here are several requests to our Zoom participants. Please note that this lecture is being recorded, so please turn off your video and microphone if you do not want to be recorded. Please use the chat feature to type questions, and they will be addressed at the conclusion of the talk. In consultation with the other map societies, we have developed a schedule of monthly Zoom and in-person meetings for the 2023 fall and winter season. This schedule of programs is listed in the current issue of the Portolan, which I received yesterday, and if you haven't received it yet, it should be in the mail, and you should be receiving it in a day or two. Our next scheduled meeting date is October 26. This will be a double header with 2 presentations being done as in-person presentations at the Library of Congress, but both will also be broadcast virtually. I will be sending out the publicity with the meeting rooms and the registration links to each map society, hopefully in the next several days. The first speaker, beginning at 3:00 p.m. will be Eastern Time, will be Ernesto Capello. He is professor of Latin American history at Macalester College. He received his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin and is the author of The City of the Center of the World, Space, History, and Modernity in Quito. That was published in 2011. And more recently, Mapping Mountains, done by Brill Research in 2020. The title of his presentation will be Mapping Mountains, which is based partially on research funded by a Library of Congress Philip Lee Phillips Society Fellowship. The second speaker will be Edward Brent Lane, whose lecture will begin at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Brent Lane has dual appointments as a visiting professor and executive in residence at Ohio University. And a fellow of Heritage Economics at the University of North Carolina's Global Research Institute. He earned a master's degree in business administration from the University of North Carolina and another master's degree in science policy from the George Washington University. He tells us he is neither a cartographer, nor a historian of cartography, nor even a collector of maps, but was drawn into the rabbit hole of early modern cartography by his interest in the roles private enterprise and speculative investment have long played in the history of human exploration. His presentation, which was recommended by several members of the Society who attended the recent MESDA Map Conference in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, is entitled John White's 1585 Map of North Carolina Outer Banks. Now it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Richard Francaviglia. Most of us will know him as Professor Emeritus, University of Texas at Arlington, but he is coming to us today as Associated Scholar with Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. The title of his presentation is The Role of Maps in Films About Exploration and Discovery, Some Latin America Examples, thus bringing a new media to us for learning and appreciating historic maps. Richard will address a few of your questions at the conclusion of his presentation. You may type your questions in the chat feature. And now I turn the program over to Richard.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here with you folks. It's been a long time since I've seen many of you, and it's always a pleasure. Tonight, or this afternoon and evening, I'm going to talk to you about maps in film. And this is my first Zoomed meeting as a Zoomer. I've attended hundreds of Zoom meetings. So pardon me as I get started here. I've got an assistant here who's going to help me. So I'm trying now to get to my PowerPoint itself. And we're going to try to see how we can do that. Okay. And so then I'll be making this presentation beginning right now. Maps have long interested me, and so have films.
Don't forget to share your screen.
That's what we're doing right now. So,
oh, there we go.
Okay, very good. And so maps have long been of interest to me, and so has filmmaking and films. And so I'm going to move right ahead here with a slideshow that presents some findings as I was working on a book on the same subject. The book is called, it was just released a couple of weeks ago, Cinematic Journeys in Latin America, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that. And I'm trying to get this to move ahead. Lucas? Trying to get this next slide going here. Okay. And it's available now from McFarland and Company. And I want to go through a few definitions first. It might seem simple, or we think, you know, we have a pretty good idea of what we mean by things, but I'm talking about motion pictures as a visual medium. I'm talking about maps as something, an object or a device that depicts places, most often using a combination of graphics, images, and spoken or written narratives. A prop, in this case, maps are props in films, is an object that appears in a film and is often relevant to the plot, storyline, and sequence. In filmmaking involve timing of images. We may think of maps as static, but they can come to life on film, morphing to mesh with the film's action and plot. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Exploration, the act of seeking out or searching for something, often a place. And films have depicted this, motion pictures have depicted this since the 19-teens at least. That was not too long after the dawn of motion pictures themselves. Discovery, the act of coming to understand in more detail that which was encountered. The region covered, and by the way, I'm going to try to move my my image of myself. I don't want to see me. I want to see this map. There we go. The countries of Latin America, we might have reason to call upon this toward the end of the presentation, but it's a complex area geographically, largely Ibero-American and indigenous, a fabulous rich history. Physically speaking, it consists of highly diverse regions, or it is a highly diverse region consisting of a series of major physiographic and climatological and topographical features. And so most of you are probably familiar with these. My publisher wanted me to use simple maps, and I think there was some advantage to this. So I used these in my book just to familiarize the reader with the places that are discussed in the book and in this presentation this evening. And so Latin American films, or Latin America in film, is a fascinating subject because of the, we often associate it with exploration and discovery. And so some examples of films that I want to talk about now are ones like Green Fire, Green Mansions, Fitzcarraldo, The Mission, Walker, Aire Libre, Anaconda, The Motorcycle Diaries, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, The Lost City of Z, Dora and the Lost City of Gold, among other things. And then going to add a little bit about Jungle Cruise too. Tom Connolly has done some very insightful work on film, maps in film, maps and film. But I love some quotes from Tom, for example, from the Oxford Companion, World Exploration. From the outset of filmmaking, it was intuited that cinema embodied exploration because the spectacle, hang on a second, I'm going to move this over just a little more out of the way. There we go. Because the spectator's eyes are led to wander about, decipher, and look all over the field of view projected on the screen. In a sense, the filmmaker is an explorer who tells a story using narrative and images. But here's some caveats. Maps in film, they usually appear just briefly, only for a few seconds. They may be poorly illuminated or not tightly focused. They're often used for effect rather than providing accurate geographic information. They are rarely authentic, although some can be, most of them being props prepared under the supervision of the film's art director and or director. Now, Dennis Reinhardt, I see he's with us. He'll remember this very well. Back in 2005 or so, I helped get a grant from the Houston Endowment to do Natural Encounters in Texas History, a 27-minute documentary film. This, I think, in retrospect, was one of the most significant activities in my entire 50-some-odd year career. It was just fabulous to make a film. I scripted it. I helped find the cast characters with some of the people that we had at UTA, and I even appear in it. I couldn't resist putting myself in. As a director, I could do anything I wanted to with the film. It was a wonderful, heady experience. And so there I am on the right as a Mexican guide guiding the German geologist and explorer Ferdinand Romer through the state of Texas, searching for strata from his study of the Cretaceous. In the film, we use maps. And by the way, here's almost a trope, but the idea of a finger pointing to something on a map is something that you often see in films about exploration. And so we use the beautiful hand-colored original as a way of helping students better understand how you could use historical maps to map environments like the cross timbers presently. A film that I discovered in the early 2000s is called Aire Libre. It's a wonderful film about Alexander von Humboldt and Aimé Bonpland in South America on their first portion of their journey. And it is a beautiful film. And by the way, I'm going to recommend films probably throughout this presentation. It begins with an aged Alexander von Humboldt in the 1850s. He's 90 years old or so, looking at maps. And some of these are basically original maps or carefully done copies of original maps for the film production. And so that's relatively rare that you see maps that are pretty credible in films, but this is one of them that features some of these maps that by Humboldt, of course, who was a cartographer in his own right. And he points out in this a particular place on a map where some very significant event happened that almost cost him or could have cost him his life. And so throughout the film, you see them making maps or employing maps, and they're inherent in the structure of the film to some extent, as is natural history, observation, and sketching and drawing. Just beautiful film about discovering natural history. The canoe gets upset in the rapids, and they have to dry all of the maps and graphics that they've been doing on the whole trip and manage to salvage them. These, of course, are now the younger Humboldt and Bonpland. And as I mentioned, Humboldt was a gifted cartographer, and we have maps like this, portions of South America by him. So this is quite a story and a beautifully filmed movie. The Lost City of Z is another film, rather more recent, that relies a lot on maps, includes them in many places in the film. It's about Percy Fawcett explorations into South America. He became, I guess you might even say, he's more obsessed with South America than I am. And I've been very obsessed with South America for decades, but he really acted on it and lost his life essentially exploring. But the film begins with some traditional maps showing the state of affairs of mapping, and what they've got to do is use Percy's cartographic skills to make maps that'll help settle a border dispute between Bolivia and Brazil. Here's an example of a map. You can see it in the background there. There's a train chugging along through Bolivia, supposedly, and the map is morphing from the map itself into the action of the film. We couldn't use film clips that run this way because they wreak havoc with PowerPoints a lot of times, or I should say zoomed PowerPoints. So I'm trying to describe how this map turns into a scene and the action comes alive. One pivotal scene in the movie involves an Indian guide, and he is consulting the maps in Percy Fawcett's book, and he tells Fawcett in Spanish, he says, "I know the entire course of the river. You haven't depicted it quite right here." And so one wonders if he will ever be recognized as an indigenous force in mapping, but at least the movie shows that. And so he's now tracing along the course of the river. And of course, Fawcett is just saying, wow, this is really good input. Embrace of the Serpent is a fabulous film that deals with indigenous mapping almost exclusively, and has some fascinating analogies and descriptions of mapping and depictions of mapping. Even this pictographic rendering on a gigantic boulder or rock face along a river is telling the story of where people are going and where they've been in this tribe. The journal of the ethnographers who are on the trip, they're interacting with the natives, and the native sees this and he says, wait a minute, those are the ways I conceptualized space too. And so the explorer Theo and the indigenous people are working together now in this enterprise here. This is a very tense scene in which the cacique or chief on the right there has swiped, if you will, pilfered the compass that Theo brought along because he wants it, because he recognizes that the compass can reveal certain things about the positions of stars and everything else. And that creates quite a bit of tension. And I just encourage you to see this film, and the way that's resolved is brilliant. Metaphorically speaking, the Amazon is featured throughout the film as not only the geographic feature, but the snake-like configuration, and snakes resonate in indigenous culture in this region especially, in many regions too, but in this region especially. That film is in black and white. All the others I'll talk about are in color, but there's a psychedelic tripping scene at the end which brings almost like the Wizard of Oz brought color, from the drab Kansas. This brings these colored graphics into play that symbolize the force of the river. A film, a quirky, delightful film that was panned by critics is called Walker by Alex Cox. I've been corresponding with him fairly recently. He's an old timer like I am now, but he made this film back in the 80s as a real caustic critique of American intervention in Nicaragua. And it features Ed Harris in one of his really great roles. He's a good actor, but this is a really fine role. And here is an example of Walker on the left, standing, meeting with a seated Cornelius Vanderbilt. And notice the centerpiece of this superbly composed scene is a map of Nicaragua right in the dead center of the screen. A close-up of this shows what Commodore Vanderbilt does and how he gets his steamboat trade and so on across Central America. And this is a pawn in Commodore Vanderbilt's scheme of things. And of course, Walker is a filibuster who wants to take over this area for the United States. Alex Cox said, we're going to use some really interesting anachronisms in this film, including this bright neon. It's even more intense than it shows up on a slide here. Bright neon red route of his trip from San Francisco all the way around to Nicaragua here. And so it's the first of many anachronisms in the film that will earn it some praise, but a lot of really criticism from people who felt that there were too many anachronisms in it. Again, I'd encourage you to see it. It's a hard film to find nowadays. The Mission, of course, is one of the classic films dealing with South America and the rivers of South America in particular. This is part of the Rio Paraná and the area of the Brazilian and Paraguayan borderlands. But it's a film that has maps in it, and they're sometimes very poignant, including a map, two maps, one behind the Padre here, one in front, and one is the where the Jesuits had settled and created this supposed paradise, and the other is what the geopolitical fortunes are going to be when Spain and Brazil begin to interact here right there to try to have a treaty that will prevent further conflict. It's a wonderful film. Green Fire, to move ahead in time from the 1770s and from the Guarani War all the way into the 1950s, the Cold War. And Green Fire reminds us that an explorer can have many forms, not just the conquistador or someone explorador, but a prospector can be an explorer too. So I include many different films in my book that are by unconventional explorers. And one scene here, Stuart Granger is thwarting off the advances of his amorous secretary, and he's going to be turning right around and walking out the door to further explore and develop the resources of Colombia. So the map here is used as a subtle reminder to set the scene, set the time, and even convey something about his goals. Green Mansions, 1959, is a fascinating film. The book itself that it's based on from 1904 by Hudson is fabulous, but it's an okay movie, but it's very interesting because it too uses maps in a few places, including the purchase of a treasure map by Anthony Perkins here, who is going to be exploring the interior of the Orinoco area of northern South America. And all we see of the map, though, is shots like this in which he is obviously consulting it. It's obviously a map, but we can't really make much of it. And he's pointing, onward to the natives. Fitzcarraldo is one of the best movies ever made about capitalism run amok in South America, in particular the rubber boom. It's a quirky, delightful movie by Werner Herzog, and it is a cartocentric film. By that I mean it uses maps throughout, and they are integral to the plot. They are integral to everything in the movie. Even this, you might say, is Fitzcarraldo himself, Klaus Kinski, seeing the Indians tapping the Hevea brasiliensis rubber tree, and they are showing the latex is running down the channels. But in a sense, to me, and some might see it this way, a subliminal reference to the dendritic type drainage patterns of the rivers that will be at the center of this film. A map here back in the offices of a rubber baron gets Kinski on the left very excited because there's a point at which the two rivers, I hope this works for you because this is working for me. That right there is a place that's based on a real place, but it's the Isthmus of Fitzcarraldo where the two rivers almost meet, and Fitzcarraldo gets a visionary plan to develop interior trade into the rubber areas and open up vast areas so he can bring the opera to Iquitos, Peru. A close-up of this map, it was a prop done by a Peruvian folk artist for Werner Herzog, a real auteur. Herzog had complete control of this film from beginning to end. It nearly cost him his life. But this film uses this map, and it's odd because it's supposed to be a treaty map from the 1890s or circa 1900, but it features very retro images of the kind that you could see from the 1500s by some of the world's great, or Europe's great cartographers, as I've shown them on the left there. In the film, Fitzcarraldo is drawing maps. He's gone berserk essentially, and he's got to find this location, and he does find it where he can actually breach this or bring the ship from one side to the other. And by the way, there's several books about the making of this film, but also Burden of Dreams, a great documentary by Les Blank, showing Werner Herzog himself consulting maps of where they were going to film this epic film in Peru. And here is Herzog himself as a young man describing to the camera that Les Blank is wielding here, how Fitzcarraldo is going to bring those two rivers together. So in a sense, this is I guess you might say, cartography as body language here. And literally, Herzog threw himself into this film. Set in more modern times, the early 1950s, The Motorcycle Diaries is a very romantic interpretation of Che Guevara's so-called motorcycle diaries that came out much later than his 1950s exploits here with Alberto Granado. Anyway, this has some really interesting maps from beginning to end in the film. This is some of the earliest footage in the film, and it shows them charting their course on a map of South America. We're seeing it's almost inverted here because north is at the bottom and south is upward here. But they're going to leave Rosario and Buenos Aires and come across here through the Pampa and come around here through Chile and all the way up here and go this way. And they do as documented. Here's a pivotal scene from the movie. It's a pivotal scene from his life, that is to say, Che Guevara's life, in which that map is, again, their pocket map here, this folding map is used by these two indigenous people to show that where they were displaced from Peru, and they're down in Chile now near Chuquicamata, and the copper company is exploiting their services, so to speak. And at this moment, Che becomes a leftist radical activist from that scene. At the very end of the film, Alberto hands off the map to Che. He says, "You mean you kept the map through the whole thing?" "Yeah, I did. And not only that, you're going to need it, Che." So he hands the map to Che, and Che, of course, is going to use it as a way to transform the political geography of Latin America. Hey, lighter fare, indeed. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a film that does use maps in many places. It's a Spielberg adventure, in case you haven't seen it. And it's one of the 5 in the franchise, but this is a sci-fi kind of strange film in which they've got to find themselves from going to the United States down into Peru to look for a lost city. And so this film beautifully uses montages like this that bring in a flying plane, and you see the course of the plane going over Cusco, Peru, and very, very interesting. And this one right here, you might even see this as a tribute to Fitzcarraldo, where they're in now the Amazon drainage, and Iquitos is here, and the ship is reminiscent of those kinds of interior adventures. Dora and the Lost City of Gold is a surprisingly good film that deals with exploration in unique ways. I highly recommend it. It was originally supposedly for just kids, but adults can find a lot in it. There's lots of very interesting comments and references to things, including one of the priceless ones to Moby Dick. But I'll let you watch the film if you haven't seen it. It's 2019. It was filmed in Queensland, Australia, but it features this cartoon character that comes to life, and she is, of course, a young girl in part of it, and a teenage girl later on. But she has, importantly, a knapsack she calls Map, and sometimes you can see sort of a map type thing in there, but actually Map also talks to her. It's almost like some kind of, on your car, the navigation thing says, turn right here. That's what this map is doing to her. So it's part of her. It's almost symbolic of how maps become part of the culture. They're searching for the lost city of Harapata in this movie. And so you see traditional mapping here like this. And then there's popular mapping like this, almost pop cartoon art that shows her travels. She's got to go to Los Angeles to meet with her cousin, and then they come back and they have all the adventures in the interior. Hyper triangulation here. These kids are trying to figure out where things are located, and they're using all these clues. And many movies like this that are pseudo-archaeological are involving different clues, and so they're spatially interconnected, and it is, in fact, cartographic in a strange way. Anaconda is a really strange and interesting film by a Peruvian filmmaker. And I became a fan of this film. I'm not supposed to be because critics don't like it, but it is one very interesting film. It's a horror film, and it's also an exploration film. And it's one of the first movies that featured a Latina in the role of an explorer, and features maps in a number of places to show the course of their journey to find the lost Shirishama tribe. They get more than they bargained for in terms of gigantic serpents and all that sort of thing. But in it, maps appear with occasionally, and the nemesis of the filmmakers and the in this crew that's going to go to find the Shirishama tribe are hijacked by John Voight, who's the craziest former Jesuit mission in film history. And here he is. He's commandeering the expedition now, and he's saying, there's where we're going. And he leaves no doubt that he's in control, because that's his hand, holding that knife. And he's saying, or else, A couple of films that are worth seeing because they start with the premise that there's a map that can reveal something about a lost city in the case of The Ruins, or a lost tribe in the case of Jungle. Jungle is a really fine movie featuring, Harry Potter has grown up here indeed. And so a map starts the travels of this explorer in Jungle. And The Ruins, on the other hand, are an expedition in which these college kids on spring break, want to see a real, not one of these tourist type sites. They want to see a real ancient site, and they get more than they bargained for. So too do the folks in Jungle, by the way. Both very gritty movies. Bacurau, I want to mention this film briefly. It's not featured in my book. It's a Brazilian film in Portuguese with great subtitles. And it's got a very interesting use of maps in it. The town of Bacurau is suddenly disappearing from maps and even geopositioning devices. They can't find their own town, and people are beginning to wonder what's happening here. And so a teacher, you can see him on the lower right there, he's trying to instruct his kids out in an open area, and he can't find Bacurau. He can't even find their own town. So he goes inside the classroom, and he's got this modern, map on the screen, and he's trying to show it. But lo and behold, Bacurau is missing from that. And so finally, he pulls down a more traditional map, and you can see it there just barely. And it's a lovingly prepared, neat prop here in this movie of this little village of Bacurau. And so he uses that to substantiate that, hey, we really do exist. But it also foretells that the people in this town are going to have to use everything that they're in their traditions to fight back against what's happening to them as bad forces from the outside world are coming to try to erase them and the town from the map. Here's a close-up of that very credible looking map here. Real light fare here, 1984 is Romancing the Stone. Very interesting film. Colombian Emeralds again feature here in this, as well as the movie Green Ice, and of course Green Fire. But Romancing the Stone has a map, and it's almost a cartocentric film because a map is used throughout it to find ways to get to an ancient, I should say, a jewel that's missing, but also this map becomes a way of having the author of a novel who's written of the story use this to find her sister who's been kidnapped by bad guys. So anyway, so Kathleen Turner, Michael Douglas in their prime there, she's consulting the map. The map is very interesting here because when you fold it a certain way, the courses shown here actually make a heart. So the stone is the corazon, the heart, the green stone. It's also a romance story. So this is maps as metaphors for sure. And here now she's feigning, this is Kathleen Turner feigning that she's in real trouble here, but she's got the upper hand. Actually, she shows the map and she's showing it. She's luring the bad guys out who are going to get their comeuppance. So here's a good example of a woman being empowered. I was mentioning anacondas and mentioning the shape of the river. How about this? You know, this goes way back into our cartographic history. And Diego Gutierrez's wonderful map of the Americas here, but showing this for all the world, that Amazon sure looks like a serpent to me. Even got the spots and color patterns there. Lastly, Jungle Cruise is a very interesting film, and it is a delightfully cartocentric film. I was surprised at how richly maps are employed in this throughout. From the Royal Geographical Society, which is not, it's called the Royal Anthropological and Diverse Adventure Society, as you see here on the left, but he's in London and he's making a presentation. He's got these historical maps really going back to the 1500s, that there's ways of having an expedition find some important lost ceremonial plants that are very life-giving. That's another trope that's so common in Amazonian films. In this, you see the expedition of Lope de Aguirre going to hell here as vines and things entrap and snakes and so on entrap the explorers. And this morphs right into this map, so that the composition of the shot I just showed you morphs right into this, which is a map of portions of the Amazonian drainage system. The movie is delightful for using these historical, pseudo-historical type maps showing the course of a riverboat that then transitions as the boat moves along into visually landscape photography. A stunning movie visually. All kinds of strange uses of maps in it and some big surprises. One of the biggest surprises of all in a movie, of any movie that features maps, and that is that these maps were not only drawn back in the 1500s, the person who drew them is the riverboat captain today, which is to say in 1916, who takes river cruises. He was a cartographer, a Spanish cartographer with the Aguirre expedition. He is called Francisco Lopez de Heredia, and there he is, and he is drafting maps in this one scene in the movie. This movie is a real tribute to cartography gone wild, I guess you might say, but it shows all sorts of plot-related stories and interactions occurring. In retrospect, it is a cartocentric film for sure, and that would be my definition of that. Oh, so in summary, maps in films are used for many, many different reasons, and here are just some, like plotting a journey, fairly simple. And given the kinetic nature of filmmaking, it's one of the oldest and still most popular, just plotting a journey. Indicating a location or of something sought after, for example, a hidden treasure. Establishing or authenticating a time period. Identifying current political situation. Depicting the state of knowledge about places, including indigenous folks. and their major role in contributing to cartography, serving as currencies, that is, as a tool or bargaining chip for hidden locations. We could see that, the romancing the stone on that one, symbolizing artistically or stylistically geographical locales, metaphorically, the Amazon River as a serpent, and so on, and helping to organize structurally the very design and format of a motion picture, the hallmark of cartocentric films like Fitzcarraldo. Now, some people may remember that Herzog also did a film called Aguirre, the Wrath of God, which does not feature any maps in it. And I would contend that there's a reason for that, because maps in a film like that would be distracting. The type of maps in films here, to summarize these things, range from the mundane to the pedestrian and highly creative and artistic. The appearance of maps in so many varied films is noteworthy. They can be in many, many different kinds of films, as I mentioned there. Even when a film, to get back to Aguirre, the Wrath of God, even when a film does not use maps, I want to emphasize that their absence in the film is important, because it suggests that the area is not well known and that there's no real authority who knows what's going on. And heaven knows, Aguirre, the Wrath of God is all about that kind of dysfunctional expedition. And I say here, as evident in this presentation, maps and films have kept pace with changes in map-making technology itself. What I've been talking about is really maps and technology here. We couldn't show certain maps moving on the screen, so we're limited by technology again. But this, again, even my presentation suggests that these maps then are a result of technology in a sense. And we know that as cartographic historians too. Most films about exploration and discovery do feature maps and are likely to in the future. And paradoxically, perhaps, although we as cartographic historians often maximize the time we spend viewing and studying particular maps, filmmakers usually minimize the time that a map appears on a screen, because the goal is to keep a story moving rather than pausing for deeper reflection about the content of a prop, in this case a map, which might really prove distracting to the audience. So I'd like to thank the Rocky Mountain Map Society for the initial invitation and being part of this with the 7 map societies. It's been a real honor to share these insights with you. And I hope now that if you have any questions, I think Ron is going to relate them to me. So I'll just wait to hear from him, I guess.
Okay, there are a couple comments and questions already, but I have a question. After looking at all these examples, do you have any assessment of the authenticity of the maps that are being shown? Are they of the appropriate time period, the appropriate style? And I know movies have lots of credits. Do they actually credit an actual map if it's being used?
I've never seen an individual map credited, and I'm usually pretty carefully looking at credits because I think that's an important part of movie going. So I think that they are props, and I think they're the result of either the director and or art director, and that they're like a lot of things. You don't see people saying, thanks for help in reconstructing these indigenous villages to so-and-so who did this, so that these are usually unsung people who draft these maps. Sometimes they do film companies do purchase real maps, and they would be maybe copies of them used for the production of the film, but that's relatively rare. Most of the time they're stylized artistic creations that plumb or look at other maps and get inspiration from them. So you'll notice that those maps of the Amazon in Jungle Cruise are yellowed and and they're in original hand type drawings, so that there's a certain credibility that the audience thinks about when they see these maps, and that is to say, hey, this is an authentic map, or this is the map that I'm being shown here. So in a film like Jungle Cruise, you're actually seeing maps that look credible. And they're incredible charts that are drawn in sections, so that this explorer has spent his entire, like, 10 lifetimes in the Amazon for 500 years or 400 years with these maps, looking for things that were lost in geographic space. I hope I've answered your question, Ron.
Well, that's interesting. Yes, I suspected as much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Robert Reamer asks, will there be a copy available of the slides and or the film list? Well, I can answer that. The presentation has been captured by video, and that will be available on the Washington Map Society's members only portion. We will also give a copy to Richard, and he can distribute that as he sees fit.
That would be great. And I would also mention that my book, Cinematic Journeys in Latin America, does explore this in a little bit different focus, or a little bit different depth, and might be appreciated by some of the viewers here, especially film buffs and people that, who are interested in exploration and geographic exploration.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, it would be nice to have a film list, especially if there are links to online versions of it. But I think we'll probably get around to that later.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, Emery Demhart. For fans of Werner Herzog and his truly mad love-hate actor Klaus Kinski, the 1972 movie Aguirre, The Wrath of God, even if it is short on maps but great on exploration, it is a must-see movie. Mm-hmm. And then he has I guess he has a link to the Wikipedia discussion of it.
Yes, I should say that Aguirre, The Wrath of God is a seminal film. It's influenced so many subsequent films. Whether it's Anaconda, whether it's Jungle Cruise, you can feel the influence of Herzog. And so, Emery, I agree with you. That film is a masterpiece in a way, and it's filmed on location. Many of the films that purport to be in the Amazon are filmed outside of Los Angeles, or Queensland, Australia is a big substitute, or portions of Hawaii, the big island for Spielberg. But I think that Herzog, for authenticity, mastered the art of on-location filming. I mean, he was in constant turmoil with the indigenous actors. He was fighting the environment at all times. And so the film is a masterpiece to just the tenacity of a filmmaker who would have the chutzpah to go out there in the in the late 60s, essentially, and film this thing on location. And the same with Fitzcarraldo. And I say that film, too, is a bookend. These two films, Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and Fitzcarraldo, 1972 and 82, essentially. So 10 years. It took him much longer than he thought to finally get Fitzcarraldo filmed, including a complete change of the main stars. And Klaus Kinski stepped into that role again and nearly drove Werner Herzog insane.
Hey,
so,
John.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, John Doctor asks, you showed numerous films using maps of the Americas. Is it possible to do a similar program with maps of Europe, Asia, or Africa? Or are there numerically more map films of the Americas?
This is an excellent question. If I had about 6 lifetimes, I would probably tackle, different continents, because yes, this technique of employing maps is a hallmark of adventure films, and so some of the better films are of African exploration, for example, and such, and Australian exploration, and so on, and Southwestern Asian exploration, and Near Eastern or Far Eastern, etc. And so I would think that the methodology that we do need these kinds of books, indeed, book length treatments of how the geography is featured in these adventure films and exploration discovery films. So I'd love to see that. Now, to answer the second part of the question, I'm not sure that I've just maybe teased out a lot of maps from these, and I could have a better understanding of the maps in other places. And so maybe some of the other people in the audience here could weigh in on that. But it seems to me that films about exploring the Nile, et cetera, that they would feature these Kipling-esque type films, would also be featured here. But I think, in a sense, maps in South America, more South America than all of Latin America generally, that there is something about that there's a pretty rich tradition of representing South America cartographically as part of the geographic imagination in Western culture.
Okay, Ben Olsen has several comments here. He says, a great talk and what a great topic. Really insightful connection between cartography and cinema. There's also a bit of urban cartography in Minority Report and likely other sci-fi films, which I have seen with my daughter.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, urban geography is featured in some films, but mostly because exploration occurs outside of cities. It's generated from the metropole, but it goes into remote areas. It seems to be more attractive to do it that way. But I think that the whole idea of maps in sci-fi and other films is really very important. And some films by Alex Cox feature some of this sort of subliminal mapping, at least of urban areas. So that's a great topic.
Okay, Ben makes another comment. As for the question about non-America's location, a map appears in the famed 1951 Bogart film, The African Queen.
Great. And by the way, that film inspired Jungle Cruise. Interestingly, so that The African Queen is one of the truly great films ever made, and it's certainly a wonderful exploration film. And that's right, it does feature a map.
Okay, Emery has another comment.
Mm-hmm.
The Indians offered Herzog to kill the mad Kinski for him. Herzog reluctantly declined and gained another 5 great movies out of Kinski.
He did. There's another movie that I mentioned in my book in a few paragraphs, and it's called Cobra Verde, in which Kinski, that's his last South American, I understand it, adventure, but Cobra Verde was filmed partly in Brazil and partly in West Africa, because it deals with the exportation of Africans to the New World. And so, yes, Klaus Kinski, and Emery, you may know this, that Klaus Kinski did a filmic version of his relationship with Klaus Kinski, and it's something like Mein beste Fiend, my best fiend, not my best friend, but my best fiend. If you've never experienced that, it's worth seeing. But Klaus Kinski is such an important force in Herzog's life, and yet I guess you could say that Herzog outlived him and felt pretty proud of that, because there were times when it could have gone the other way.
Okay, that looks like all the questions in the chat feature. So I'd like to thank you very much for this presentation. I think it was a very good way to start off our fall season. We do have some gifts for you. I haven't actually purchased the ones for you, but I'd like to get you an urban map from Territory. It's a company here in Washington, D.C., but they do a variety of cities throughout the U.S. So I need to know if you have a greater affinity for Oregon cities or Texas cities.
Oregon cities now, although
Okay.
Texas is still pretty dear to me. The folks in Texas have a wonderful collection at UT Arlington and other places. And so the Oregon ones would be sort of fascinating. My wife and I
Okay.
are exploring some of the cities still here in Oregon, and they're delightful.
Okay, the other thing is a cut line map, another urban image. So I'll make some selections for you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that very much.
Okay. So I guess now we can stop the share, and if anybody would like to just make some general comments or socialize for a few minutes, that would be fine.
Do I do something to stop this sharing of these things? Because I can't seem to.
There should be
Oh.
something at the top of your screen.
I
that
got it
says
now. Stop share. Very good. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Ron,
Yes.
anything new about an editor?
No. The person that we had selected for the editor resigned after several months because they had another appointment, another full-time appointment. So we are searching for an editor. And Tom Sander has agreed to, well, he's edited the current issue and he'll do one more issue, but we would like to have a new editor in place before the end of the year. And I think there would be plenty of support from the board and other members to help the process of editing the journal. Tom, do you want to say anything?
Nothing at the moment. We've had quite a few very nice responses from the membership in view of the appeal that Jeff Katz made last week. However, so far, we haven't identified the perfect candidate yet. We have 3 expressions of interest in helping. Helping is one thing, but actually managing the process is something else. So we're moving along. It's we asked that responses come in by the middle of the month of September. We know we're not quite there yet, so we're seeing whether a few other folks might have been slow in their expression of interest. Once we have all that together, then the board will look at the candidates we have. We would prefer somebody from within the society rather than going outside the society, thinking that person would know the publication, would know the group we're addressing better than a complete novice who is outside of the world of map societies. So we're looking hard, and we hope to have something to report by the middle of October, latter part of October. But with my relocation to a different house, I have to give the job over to somebody else. So we'll see how all that comes. We'll keep you all posted.
Okay, I see Chris Butler has left, but I wanted to sort of make a pre-publication announcement here. Chris has been working on a book which will be published by next spring, and it's about drink maps in Victorian Britain. If you'll remember, I think it was several years ago, she did a talk on drink maps for the Map Society. So she has turned that into a book, and I think we can look forward to seeing that publication.